So now we're going to begin our panel discussion, and Irene Rogers is going to give us the questions that people put into the chat previously during the two presentations. And again, thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to be with us and answering these really important questions.
Thank you, Mike. So I just want to take a moment to thank Allison, Nichol, and Dr. Kothare for sharing of their time and their expertise. This is such a resource for the people living with epilepsy, our agencies of the coalition, and anyone who cares about someone living with epilepsy, and certainly the broader community. So we truly appreciate this. Also, just want to reiterate what was said earlier. Slides may or may not be available from the presentations, but we have recorded the presentations, so that will be available after the conference. And then also to any one of the agencies within the coalition are certainly a resource for anyone who is affected by epilepsy. And so please reach out to us. We provide support, advocacy, and education. So please feel free to reach out to us at any point. Okay, so as the morning session, we also have a number of questions for our panelists today, this afternoon. So we'll start with you, Allison. That's okay. Now, this was asked prior to your presentation, but it might be worth reiterating some of the resources or the information. So someone had inquired about educational laws that protect students with epilepsy. So maybe just an overview of that again.
Sure. I mean, there are really two. When I'm talking about education, I'm talking about K through 12. I mean, certainly the Americans with Disabilities Act is also a federal non-discrimination law that does also cover K through 12 education as well as college. It covers everything except a purely religious school. So if your child is in a religious school, the ADA is not likely to cover that, but would cover everything else. That works in consort with the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. That's a federal law. Federal government gives the money to states with a set of mandates for how to provide a free, appropriate public education to children with disabilities in K through 12. It's a very lengthy law. There's a lot in it. The requirements are pretty specific, but it's really carried out by the states. That's the primary difference between that and Section 504. Section 504 provides many of the same protections that the ADA does, right? Except they're just used for different things. Any indication you have that a child has difficulty in the learning process, and frankly, that can be as simple as my child has seizures, they need time to recover during school, so they're not in class for the same 40 minutes as every other student. That can implicate learning. And I'm not suggesting that you have to have ADD or ADHD or dysgraphia or dyslexia or any of those things. 504 is really for anything that is unrelated to learning. So my child is being denied being on the sports team because they have epilepsy. That shouldn't be allowed. My child rides the bus and I want them to be able to keep their rescue medicine with them. You know, there are all these things that come up, but they're not directly related to learning. That's really a 504 plan. So, and the remedy schemes if something goes wrong are very different. You know, 504, you go to the federal government, you can go to departmentofeducation.gov, file an online complaint with the Office of Civil Rights. They will open an investigation. Getting a remedy, again, under the individualized education plan system is more complicated because you get more, the trade-off for getting more due process rights, for you being at an IEP meeting They have to bring experts. You're allowed to bring experts. You're allowed to bring an advocate. And it's a very, very detailed plan about how your child is going to successfully learn in that school. Well, the trade-off for that is they can't make changes without you. You have lots of due process rights, but that means you also have to go through an administrative remedies process on an IEP side that you don't on 504. So I hope that's helpful. If you go to our YouTube site, everything I just said is in a video that we just put out this year. And I will say the Department of Education is fantastic at putting out plain language, technical assistance documents that can help you understand this process. You can always contact me. I'll give you my number later. So I hope that's helpful. But if you don't mind, can I just have 1 minute on cannabis?
Of course, but just before you do, I just was going to add to what you had said, Allison. So someone did ask about getting in contact with you. So if we can put your information up in the chat, that would be great. And then also too, that, you know, in regard to the advocacy piece, again, just to reiterate that the Epilepsy Coalition of New York State, the agencies within the coalition can serve as advocates during these processes with the education system. So please feel free to reach out to them. And then also too, if you could, the YouTube is the Epilepsy Foundation, the National Epilepsy Foundation.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you.
No, not at all. That's all great information for people. But there was a little conversation about cannabis. Something just happened literally on Friday that we have been trying to get done for a few years, and it's wonderful news. So I wanted to share it. There is a cannabis research bill that we have been trying to get through the Congress for a few years. In the lame duck session, which is right now, they passed it, both the House and the Senate. It is on its way to the president. And here's what it does and doesn't do. I think the popular press is sort of mangling this. It's a weed bill. It's marijuana, you know, this kind of mess. No, it's not a weed bill. It's a medical research bill. It does not make marijuana now legal on the federal level. That is not correct. Do not act on that belief that you know, wherever you live in whatever state you can now smoke pot and it's legal. That's not true. This bill is a medical research bill. One of the problems with trying to come up with additional therapies that are cannabinoid based is that researchers for a long time could only get their hands on cannabis that have been grown by the University of Virginia. I don't know the history of that, and I don't really care. It just seems weird. That would be Virginia. And now, so what this bill does, it says, well, that doesn't make sense. And so it opens up the number of places that researchers can go to get the material that they need to continue their research. This is a huge change. It's been years in the making. It's going to be a wonderful thing for people with disabilities. What it doesn't change is this. Marijuana is still a Schedule I drug. You cannot, even if you have a medical card, you can't smoke at work and be protected by the ADA. The ADA does not offer any protection for people who smoke marijuana and go to work. Okay, even if you have a medical card, even if it's under state law, it is legal for you. And if I could just have 10 more seconds, please explain to your children and or your spouse that even though you have a medical marijuana card, you cannot smoke a bunch of marijuana and drive your car. I get endless calls, mostly from young people, but sometimes from adults who frankly should know better. Well, because I have this medical card, I can smoke marijuana, drive my car because it's legal. No, I mean, a fifth of whiskey is legal too, but you can't drink that and drive your car. So please have this conversation with people in your life who think that is true. I'm trying to get rid of that mythology. So I'm sorry to take up so much time, but please go ahead.
Dr. Kothare, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, I just want to add one point. for the families, the parents who are there on this conference, when we talk of marijuana, there are two components to it. There is CBD and there's THC. All the research that's been done and the drug Epidiolex that's approved is 99% proof CBD. There's no THC. The THC may sometimes help and sometimes may worsen seizures. So don't tell me that I'm going to smoke pot today so that my epilepsy is under better control. It may actually worsen it. So be aware about that. That CBD is what protects you, not THC. And by the way, CBD does not work on CBD receptors. It works on by an unknown mechanism on some different receptors, which I'm not going to discuss over here. But the point is, it does not work on the CBD receptors. So that's the point I would like to make. So now coming to, somebody asked over there, does the DMV know about this? The answer to that is that you are mandated to report to the DMV that you have epilepsy, and then the DMV decides whether you can drive or not. So yes, the DMV knows that you have epilepsy. Will the insurance company increase your insurance? I don't know the answer. I think it's case by case in insurance companies, but maybe Allison has a better opinion about that than me. If you would like to opine on that point, I don't know clear answer.
And Allison, it also could vary state by state as far as reporting requirements, correct?
I also want to add, there was a question about, is SUDEP more common in older age? Well, as I showed you, the data is pretty much across all ages, but there's something known as epileptic heart. So an epileptic heart is a condition which is now being recently recognized that happens in ages above 40 years of age, where because of continuous seizures, because of this sympathetic overdrive and the catecholamines that are flowing, you get an accelerated atherosclerosis and the higher risk of having heart attacks in this population. And in fact, we are finding that we always knew that there are certain SUDEP genes, certain epilepsy genes which trigger you to have more epilepsy and more SUDEP. Now we know that because of continuing seizures on a chronic basis, these genes can actually get activated, not born by, but actually get activated after birth, what is known as acquired channelopathies and genes because of refractory epilepsy. And they may contribute to this epileptic heart that we see in adults above 40 years of age who die of heart attacks. The SUDEP patients die of unknown reasons, whether it's cardiac, it's respiratory, it's neurological, we don't know. But cardiac death is where you have a heart attack and accelerated atherosclerosis. That's, I want to just clarify that point.
Thank you, Kothare. Dr. Kothare. So Allison, I'm sorry, you were going to respond to what Dr. Kothare had brought up about the driving and.
Yes. So yes, it's different in every state. If you go on epilepsy.com, you will find a database and it will contain your state's law. The average is about 6 months, the suspension, being seizure free for 6 months. There are one or two states that it's a year, and many, like Texas and others that are 3 months. Under some state laws, you have a duty to report. You must honor that duty. Your doctor may have a duty to report. He or she must honor that duty. Do not drive if your license is suspended for this reason, because if you are caught, and if the reason you're caught is because you have been in an accident, I can absolutely guarantee you that your insurance company is not going to pay for anything. And I can also guarantee you that if you injure someone and or kill someone, you will be charged with a serious crime. I talk to people a handful of times a year who are being charged with vehicular homicide because they are driving even though they know they are still actively having seizures. There's not a whole lot I can do for you or anybody else. I know these, I'm not saying this is easy. If you're in a rural area and you got to get to work, I'm not saying it's easy, but you cannot expect a lot of support from any quarter if you know you're having seizures and you shouldn't be behind the wheel of a car and you do it anyway and something happens. There's not a whole lot somebody can do for you.
I also want to add on that point. From a physician standpoint, there are 5 states where physicians are mandated to report. So these states include New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania, California, and Nevada. In these, luckily, New York is not one of those states, but we get patients across from New Jersey where we don't have to report to them to the DMV because we practice in New York State. There's also a new law, a law which has been there for some time now. It's called Megan's Law. And basically, if you are sleep deprived and you drive in New Jersey, it's a criminal offense if you commit any accident. So just be aware about that. That's a double law that comes in New Jersey and probably in Nebraska, I believe. 2 or 3 states, if you're sleep deprived, you cannot drive. So just be aware about the legality of driving with respect to epilepsy and sleep deprivation.
Yeah, and I just have to add, you know, people will say, this is mostly young people again, who will say, well, how's anyone going to know, you know, that I knew that I was having seizures? Well, you know, that Fitbit you're wearing that records your seizures, or your seizure diary, or what you brag to your friend in the bar that you have seizures, but you drive anyway. You know, that's, you call that data, I call that evidence against you, right? So there are lots of ways now in the electronic age where even though you're not telling anybody you're having seizures and driving, that information can be found out.
And
Also,
there's another question,
yes.
I'm sorry, in regard to, obviously driving is a very important question to people living with epilepsy, and it's, you know, indicated here in the questions or the chat. So it says, as far as license suspension due to a seizure, if the patient lives in a state where the suspension is 6 months, but the doctor lives where it is a year, or the other way around, you know, like, which will apply? Is it up to the doctor's discretion?
So as I mentioned in my talk, the doctor just gives recommendations. The final authority is the DMV. So if you're residing in New Jersey, and if it's 6 months over there, then it's the 6 months rule, even though I practice in New York.
It's where you're licensed. It's wherever the person has their license. And likewise, the parallel question is, well, if I'm suspended in New York, can I drive in New Jersey? No, you cannot. No. Any of these questions where you're like, well, I'm going to be really, no, don't stop. Just stop. You cannot game this system successfully. No.
Dr. Kothare, there's a question regarding devices. It says neurophase available to patients and families to start using data to try to predict seizures. Their son has a VNS, but they're not aware of how the data can be obtained.
So with the VNS, you can, when you interrogate the device, you can do how many auto stimulations that are done every day on this patient. How many times do you swipe the magnet to abort a seizure? That data is available to the physician, and we often look at that and we can say, okay, he's having more seizures at 4 o'clock in the morning, because that's when the auto stim is going like crazy. He's having more seizures early morning when he's waking up. So we can look at that data, and we do change our VNS parameters as well as medications based on that.
Thank you. Back to you, Allison. Someone was very appreciative of all that information that you provided today. And she's looking into information for her adult daughter regarding school districts and what they can do to hire more people with disabilities. There's K through 12, there's students with disabilities, including epilepsy. But there doesn't seem to be models of adults with disabilities in the school setting. So, I guess what can be done to encourage the public school districts? I don't know if this is within your purview, but
sadly, no. I mean, I do everything I can to get people with disabilities hired into jobs. I think more is the better, and I agree that having adult role models, especially in K through 12 education, would be a terrific thing. But I'm afraid that aside from lobbying your state legislature, I stay away from politics because I'm allergic. It makes me sneeze. But work with your state legislature, Call the governor's office on the employment of people with disabilities. Every governor's office has one. There's a protection and advocacy system that has is a federal private partnership. They have in every state they have one or two of those. But basically, it's got to be something that's mandated through the legislature or encouraged through the governor's office.
I want to add one more point to this mother who said about this kid becoming an adult. As soon as your child turns into an adult at 18, and if they go to college, please make them sign a release form that they have to give to the nursing area in their college, because if they get a seizure, they will not be allowed to report that seizure is happening to their parents. They will report directly to us. So please sign a release to the college authorities so that you will be called besides calling us. That's very, very important.
And as the lawyer here, I would caution anyone from signing any release about anything without running it past an attorney.
In regard to the devices, Dr. Kothare, are they most effective? There seems to be some debate amongst the chat. Are they most effective for generalized or focal seizures, or both?
So VNS is approved for both focal and partial epilepsy refractory, of course. NeuroPace is approved for adults with partial epilepsy. And that's the way it is. There are trials going on looking at NeuroPace devices in generalized epilepsies. There is a trial that is being planned looking at the use of NeuroPace in pediatric ages up to the age of 12 years. It's still not yet started. Or it's partially started, but had some problems going forward, but it will continue in the future.
And then just we'll stay on the devices. You had talked about the resources as far as the pillow. You highly encourage people. I'm not sure if we put it in the chat yet, but I think we do have that information about where people can obtain that pillow, as well as just a little bit more about the devices and being able to detect seizures and I guess the efficacy of having a seizure support dog or a seizure service dog. If you can elaborate on that a bit.
So I forgot one more. There's another device which is called Deep Brain Stimulation, DBS, and that's also approved for use in adults with partial epilepsy. It does not detect, it just keeps on continuously giving current, just like a VNS. So that's another thing that's available. I just didn't mention much about that. But in terms of the seizure dogs, they're useful for detecting generalized seizures. They will run to the family member and tell them the kid is having a seizure or something of that kind. But if you're having subtle absences or focal seizures with a lack of awareness without tonic-clonic activity, the dog will not be able to detect that. But it's a useful tool to have. The seizure trackers, they're sleep logs, and you can upload that data to your physician. The Embrace 2, you can have a $40 or about $50 payment to the telephone company. That data automatically gets released to us through the cloud so that we can look at it. So those are other alternative options. And of course, the pillow costs about $100. It's available on Amazon, and please purchase that. That's something which you should definitely have if you're having seizures, because many seizures happen at night, and most cases of SUDEP have been found dead in sleep with their face buried in the pillow in the prone position.
Thank you.
Can I just add that those alert dogs are covered by the ADA, as they're not emotional support animals. They actually are considered service animals under the ADA. If you are flying on an airplane, you want to go to dot.gov, and I think these rules are also on our website, but there has been a recent change to flying with any kind of a dog, whether it's a seizure alert dog, a guide dog for the blind, or whatever. You have to fill out some amount of paperwork in advance. You didn't used to have to do that. Just want people to be aware of that. If you're flying, you want to check into that. It might have been before you had no problems. It's changed a little bit.
in addition to driving, employment and epilepsy is a huge concern for a number of people. And one person wrote in the chat that they felt that their daughter was let go from employment because of her seizures, even though, that was not the stated case. And should the person contact the EEOC?
That's a great question. So remedies for employment discrimination under the ADA, which is a federal law. You have in all states but one, I think it's Alabama, but you should check. In all states but one, you have 300 days to file a complaint of discrimination with the EEOC from the date of whatever it is you're complaining about. We call that an adverse action in the law. I just call it the bad thing, whether it's so if you didn't get hired, you think that's why you have 300 days to file that complaint. If it's, I didn't get my accommodation, it's 300 days from that date. And certainly once you're terminated, it's 300 days from that date. That's the federal law. In order to go into federal court, this is something you have to do first. You have to go through the EEOC's administrative process for some period of time. Now, there are also state laws, right, that govern, that occupy some of the space on employment discrimination. You don't have to use the federal law. Can use a state law. California's got great state laws. New York's got some great state laws. Some people, want that option too. I don't know the timelines for each of those individual state laws because I'm a federal practitioner. So, but you want to check into that. But if the case is very old, it could be problematic unless the state law, has a longer statute than 300 days. And to file that, you don't even have to go in person. In fact, most of our offices are not still even open right now. You go online to eeoc.gov, the landing page, upper right-hand search box, just put file a complaint. It will come up. A map will come up of where you are. It'll give you contact information for how to get on the calendar for the EEOC office where you live. And a lot of it's still being done over the phone.
Thank you. So there have been some comments again about the safety and seizures. There's a question about the seizure tracker, I apologize, and whether it'll pick up seizure activity. There's also people commenting about SUDEP. And, it's a very difficult topic. It's something that you had talked about, Dr. Kothare, that it's, patients have said that it hasn't been brought up during visits. And, it's something that is so important to speak of and for patients to understand what the risks are. And you seem to be very comfortable speaking about it, but maybe just talk about how perhaps your approach and maybe what patients on the call can do to advocate for that information.
Let me address the first question. So about the seizure trackers. So obviously there are two types. The Embrace 2 is an objective method. It actually detects movements of your hand and says you're having movements, they probably are seizures. Of course, there could be a false positive. But this other seizure tracker is usually a seizure log that you have to fill in on a daily basis, upload it to the cloud so that we can see it. So one is subjective and one is objective. So that's about the tracker. Now, in terms of SUDEP, I've given talks at the PAMI meeting. The PAMI is the Prevention Against Mortality in Epilepsy meetings. And the last one I gave in Washington, DC, in Virginia, many family members came to me and said, why didn't my neurologist discuss the risk of SUDEP? And we feel bad because we were not counseled about it. And my kid now, or my adult patient, or whoever has died. So I think the way I put it to my patients is I tell them, if you have refractory epilepsy, I'm much more emphatic that the risk of really dying of SUDEP is 1 in 1,000, and that risk goes down to 1 in 100 if you have really super refractory epilepsy and you have gone into seizure clusters and status epilepticus. If you've had infrequent seizures here and there, the risk is very low, but yet a new paper that came out said that patients who were in remission for more than 5 years, patients who had febrile seizures, patients who had what is known as benign Rolandic epilepsy, all of them have had a risk of dying, and there are anecdotal case reports of them passing away in sleep. So I always put it in context, but I do bring it up. And obviously the flyers are placed over there for them to read and ask the questions themselves, which makes it much more easier for me to discuss this at greater length.
Thank you. We only have a couple of minutes left, but is there anything that we didn't cover? Anything that either of you would like to add before we
I'd like to
close?
just add one point, which is, that didn't come up, but what do you do when an epilepsy patient, a woman with epilepsy, becomes pregnant? And I want to address this important point. First point, all women with epilepsy should have folic acid given to them throughout their entire life. And I start this even at the age of 12 and 13 to start giving a milligram of folic acid on a daily basis that prevents the neural tube defects. The risk of neural defects is higher in patients with epilepsy than those without. So, and that's a preventable situation. Secondly, during pregnancy, certain anti-epileptic drugs, their levels rise. For example, lamotrigine, which is commonly used in females with epilepsy, the lamotrigine levels can significantly drop during pregnancy, especially in the second and third trimester. And we have to increase the doses of lamotrigine by almost 2 or 3-fold. And then immediately after delivery, that dose has to be cut down because they become super toxic if you don't do that. So that's an important aspect. And we avoid a drug like valproate, sodium valproate or Depakote, because that is very dangerous for teratogenicity and fetal malformations. So we do not use sodium valproate in females anytime for that reason.
Thank you.
And let me just give you my number. I'm at
Sure.
301. I'm at 301-918-3767, 301-918-3767. That is a voicemail box. If I, for some reason, pick up that number, that is the day that you should get your lottery tickets, because mostly I'm already on the phone with someone else. Speak to about more than 1,000 people a year. So, but I do try to get back to people within 24 hours. And I want to thank everybody here, not just the conference folks who I adore for having the conference, but everyone who's here for all that you do every day in the service of people with epilepsy.
And
Well, thank you, Allison.
I'd like to echo the same feelings and thoughts. Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you for participating.
Yes, thank you, Allison. Thank you, Dr. Kothare. And Irene, thank you very much for fielding those questions during that last panel.